Rotarians and guests, we welcome you. You know, this is considered the best program in the world, the best Rotary in the world. And it gives me a pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. I really don't need any notes, but I brought some anyway because Bob Hoffman is getting and receiving awards constantly, and I can't keep up with him. But Bob Hoffman is a partner in the firm of Beers and Hoffman, along with Peter Kay down here, who was in charge of putting the program together with Bob. Bob will be speaking on the life of Dick Winters, actually from this book, The Band of Brothers. All of you recall, you know, there's a series of The Band of Brothers that won several awards as well. Bob will be speaking about that. This is an autographed book from Dick Winters, and Dick's statement always at the end says, "Hang tough." So we try to hang tough. And Bob will also be speaking on the conversation with Major Dick Winters by Colonel Cole Kingsley. And Bob is featured in this book, and he's been a great asset in helping put this book together as well. Bob is a graduate of, he's a Lebanonian, you know, he's a Pennsylvania Dutchman as well. He graduated from Lebanon High School as president of his class, as well as a valedictorian. And he is probably the only registered architect that we're aware of that was also president and CEO of a Good Samaritan hospital in Lebanon, and he's still on the board. And Bob joined the firm of Beers and Hoffman in 1993, and Bob has led many projects, and he's in charge of our Lebanon office. He's also a four-time chairman of the United Way in Lebanon. 4 times, one's enough, but 4 times is a lot. He has been honored by his class in Lebanon High School Lifetime Achievement Award, and he is from his alumni. He is an Alliance International Marvin Jones Fellow, and Bob served as an intelligence officer in the 193 Special Operation Group for the Air National Guards. So let me present to you then my friend and Dick Winters' closest friend, Bob Hoffman.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I told Bob I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to speak today because the dispensation from Lions International for me to speak to a Rotary Club only came through on Monday. So it was a close call. You know, I have a nephew who is a veterinarian in Arizona, and he's quite the expert on large animals. He told me recently he was speaking to a Rotary Club out there, and a young Rotarian came very late and very noisily into the back of the room, just as he said that lions have a prolific sex life. And the voice was heard from the back of the room, "Doggone it, I just joined the Rotary." You know, when Bob extended the invitation to speak here today, there were several dates that were possibilities, and I thought today, the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor was perhaps a very appropriate day to talk about one of our most venerated heroes and in the history of this country. 75 years ago, on December 7th, 1941, the lives of countless millions of Americans were dramatically changed. I know my father, who had just actually, in 1941, finished his medical internship at Lancaster General Hospital, had gone to Mannheim to establish a primary practice. He wasn't there for even a year, and Pearl Harbor came. My dad's youngest brother was at Pearl Harbor and was a Pearl Harbor survivor. My father closed his office, joined the military, and he never returned to Mannheim. My brother was 3 years old before my dad ever actually set eyes on him. But, you know, like my dad, the life of Dick Winters was dramatically changed on December 7th. But like so many others, Dick had absolutely no idea of the extent of that change and the long-lasting effect that that would have upon his life. You know, I sometimes make the mistake that I think that everybody knows the story of Dick Winters, and I know that that's not true. So I thought today I would just give a short history. And although I could talk for literally hours about Dick Winters, as Elizabeth Taylor most assuredly should have said to her 7 husbands, I promise this will be brief. Dick Winters was born in New Holland, and he spent his formative years there and in Ephrata. This house in Ephrata was the house of the Winters, and ironically, this house is located directly next door to the Winters statue in Ephrata. The Winters later moved to Lancaster, where Dick graduated from what is today Lancaster McCaskey High School. He then attended Franklin and Marshall College. And while Dick was a student in Franklin and Marshall, he earned money by painting the steel towers of high transmission lines, which, you know, when you look at the perch there and the lack of safety gear, you know, I think this is, you know, foreshadows the risk-taking that was part of Dick's line during World War II. When Dick graduated from Franklin and Marshall, he thought it was appropriate to join the service for a year. This was something that he felt was a requirement for him to do, and then he would move on in his life. Well, Pearl Harbor came, and that 1 year turned into 5 years. Now, Winters, who was always a physical fitness buff, when he went to OTS as a college graduate, he was given that opportunity. Even though he went in as an enlisted man, he was given the opportunity to go to officers training school. And while there, he noticed the new type of soldier that had never existed before, the paratroopers, being trained. And he thought, boy, these guys are really in good physical condition, and their training is so intense. And by darned, if I'm going to serve in this war, I want to serve with the best. So he was able to get a transfer from the infantry into the paratroopers. He became a member of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment, which later became part of and was attached to the 101st Airborne. Now, the 101st, like hundreds of thousands of other American troops, were sent to England, where they intensively trained for what was going to be ultimately the invasion of Hitler's fortress Europe. The training was very extensive. And on June the 5th, the night before D-Day, the opportunity that they had been waiting for so long came. This is a picture of Easy Company marching to the C-47s for their drop into Normandy. When Easy Company parachuted into Normandy, Winters was not aware that the company commander of Easy Company had been killed. His C-47 was shot down by German flak, and that made Winters the de facto company commander of Easy Company. Now, Winters jumped with what is called a leg bag, and a leg bag was a bag that held all the weaponry, the munitions, hand grenades, etc., that was tied to the paratrooper's leg. The 101st had never practiced with this. It was a British invention, but nonetheless, the 101st decided that they were going to have their troopers on D-Day jump with these leg bags. Well, the wind shot was so tremendous that Winters, like almost everybody else, their leg bag was ripped off their body. So Winters actually landed behind enemy lines the night before D-Day with nothing but a knife that had been in his boot. And he said, he told me, and I think this was the feeling of a lot of men that night, that if I survive this, there isn't anything in my life that is going to intimidate me. The next day, Winters, as the new company commander, was given the assignment to silence 4 105mm German guns that were trained on Utah Beach. Utah and Omaha Beach were the main beaches that the Americans were coming in on. With a handful of men, Winters was able to, with some brilliant tactics, to take out these guns that were manned by 50 Germans. That tactical event is still to this day taught at West Point. Winters was nominated that night for the Congressional Medal of Honor. The head of the commanding officer, commanding general of the 101st Airborne, Maxwell Taylor, had predetermined that only one Medal of Honor was going to be given to a member of the 101st Airborne. There had been early in the engagement, there had been a bayonet charge, and the officer who led that charge was given the Medal of Honor. So therefore, Dick's award was downgraded to the second highest honor that this country can offer, the Distinguished Service Cross. And this slide shows Winters receiving the DSC in Normandy, in the field, from General Omar Bradley. Well, after the events of Normandy, the 101st Airborne was assigned to what was a very ill-fated engagement, Market Garden. And this is the jump into Holland and the attempt to come in around the north way into Germany. It didn't work out so well. And this has been made famous by the movie and the book, A Bridge Too Far. Well, after Market Garden, the 101st and, of course, Easy Company were given an opportunity to get some rest and relaxation. But that didn't last long. Pretty soon, Hitler decided with a last-ditch effort that he was going to come through the Ardennes to see if he could go through the American lines, which were very weak at that point, and get to Antwerp to cut off the supplies that were necessary for the American troops. Well, things were very, very bad. And the Battle of the Bulge, as it was later called by, actually by the press, was the, in terms of World War II, was the largest amount of casualties that we experienced. Well, things were bad, so Eisenhower had the 101st literally trucked in to Bastogne to try to reinforce that and to prevent Hitler from, and those troops from gaining hold of Bastogne. Bastogne was the center of a very extensive road network, and it was a very, very important strategic area. Well, the 101st held. They were completely surrounded by the Germans. And when the Germans sent a delegation asking them to surrender, the famous retort from the acting General McAuliffe was nuts. And of course, the Germans really didn't understand exactly what that meant, but they did get the message, I think, at least from the body language that day. But the 101st Airborne, through that engagement, they were called the battered bastards of Bastogne. I remember when the head writer for Band of Brothers visited Dick's farm, and as was typically the case, Dick would invite me out to be part of the interviews. And we were walking around the pond on his farm, and Eric Jenderson, who was the writer, commented to Dick, he said, that must have been an unbelievably terrifying thing to be completely surrounded by the German troops. And I kind of chuckled and I interjected, well, Eric, they're paratroopers, they're actually supposed to be surrounded. And Eric said, I like that. I like that. And actually, it made it into the series. And as much as I looked for a footnote in the credits, it wasn't there. Well, the Easy Company and 101st had some more terrifying fighting to do. In the process, they liberated one of the Germans' concentration camps, and that was an experience that emotionally stayed with Dick for the rest of his life. They ended the war right here on the terrace of Hitler's Eagle's Nest in Berchtesgaden. And that is Dick with his officers from the battalion and from easy company. Winters had entered the military as an enlisted man, and at war's end, he had a meteoric rise to the rank of major, and he was the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 506 PIR, 101st Airborne. It was an amazing record. You know, if he had stayed in the military, his wartime record, I think without question, would have catapulted him to a wonderful career and probably very, very high rank. But he didn't want to do that. On the evening of D-Day, as famously was represented in the series, Winters thought, if I survive this, I just want to get a small piece of land and build a house and live there in peace for the rest of my life. Well, he did get that piece of land, and it was nestled at the foot of the mountains in Lebanon County, right north of Fredericksburg, and that is where he raised his family. As this picture shows, Winters literally built the house himself. Here he is shown addressing the stone that was the main construction of the home. Well, Dick Winters, in terms of his wartime service, I feel very strongly that he was the quintessential citizen soldier. Like the famous Roman general Cincinnatus, Winters answered the call to service, and he served with honor and distinction. And at the conclusion of the war, he went back to his civilian life to live in peace. And unfortunately, that peace was shattered a few years later when he was actually called up and had to serve for 2 additional years in the Army during the Korean War. The Winters I knew was an intensely private man. He was a humble man. He was a man of great intellect, a man strong in both character and in physique. And very interesting, he was like so many World War II veterans, he virtually never spoke about his wartime service. I have met a number of people that spent as long as a decade working with Dick Winters, and until the Band of Brothers was released, they had no idea that he had even been in the service. And, you know, so you kind of wonder, well, how can somebody that was this private and this humble become perhaps the most famous company commander in the history of World War II? Well, Winters was profoundly changed by the war. And as things moved on, he felt a very strong need that someday he wanted to tell the story of the brutality of war, of the difficult decisions that leaders make during wartime, and also very especially the relationships that are made upon men who are literally facing life and death every day. Winters recalled, a military organization is a family, and is a family. Hardship and death bring a family together. Easy company was such a family. In terms of the relationships that were formed, I think one that is testament to the special bond that occurs during wartime was the gentleman who was Dick Winters' best friend. These two men could not have been more unlike each other. Winters, who was a teetotaler, his best friend was Lewis Nixon, who was a Yale-educated alcoholic. And you know, when I first saw this picture a number of years ago, I actually thought it was one of my roommates on Sunday morning Harvard weekend. But, you know, under normal circumstances, these men would never have been friends, but they became as close as brothers. That friendship endured the war. Winters told me that he had never experienced anyone in World War II that was better under fire than Lewis Nixon. That friendship lasted after the war until Nixon's passing. And Nixon served as Dick's best man at his marriage. Well, during the war, Winters, with this great desire that he had to catalog the events. He kept a diary, a very small pocket diary that he kept in his coat that was given to him by one of his aunts. And in that diary, every day, he would list, just in outline fashion, a word, or perhaps 2 words. And his hope was that later, when he had the opportunity, he would flesh those out into a more complete narrative. And he always thought that the threat of Easy Company, because they had literally served in all the major engagements in the European theater, that it really was a wonderful way to tell the story of the American fighting man. In the 50s and 60s, he had approached a number of authors with the idea that perhaps he could cajole someone into writing this history, but it didn't work because everybody wanted to be paid, and winners didn't really have the money. Easy Company had a reunion in New Orleans, and that is when the whole thing changed. At the time, already a noted historian, Stephen Ambrose, was on the faculty of University of New Orleans, and he had established a Veterans Center there. Well, one of Winter's men lived in New Orleans and had heard all about Ambrose, so he invited Ambrose over to the house, and in the kitchen, they sat around the table, and Dick Winters really pleaded his case for the story about Easy Company and the European theater. Ambrose jumped at the chance. For no remuneration, he wrote the book. Later, he said to Dick, it was the easiest book I ever wrote. And the reason for that was because of the diary. Dick had actually also drawn maps in the diary of all the major engagements. And of course, he had files of orders and files on all of the men of Easy Company. And there is a very specific difference in terms of Band of Brothers and so many of the stories of World War II, the memoirs that are written by people who were involved, but they're written 30 years, 40 years, or even longer after the time, and memory can tend to fade. Band of Brothers was really written on real-time information that was cataloged by Dick during the war. Well, Band of Brothers was a successful book, but it really was only a successful book in the world of the historian and in the world of those who were history buffs. It was only after the series that Band of Brothers, the book, took off. And I think as we stand here today, the book has been translated into 16 languages and has been circulated throughout the world. And then there were other books. Lancaster's own Larry Alexander wrote a very wonderful book, a biography of Dick called The Biggest Brother. And as a matter of fact, when Winters went to the Emmys to accept the award, he was introduced by Steven Spielberg as the biggest brother. Then followed Dick's autobiography. The autobiography was written in conjunction with Colonel Cole Kingseed, retired, and Kingseed was the retired chairman of the history department at West Point. Following that, the more recent book, Conversations with Major Richard Winters, also written by Cole Kingseed, and that is a book that I had the privilege of being involved in. Well, as I said, things really took off when Band of Brothers was made, and of course when Band of Brothers won the Emmy. This was a picture at the afterglow with the gentleman, you see the back of the head in the lower left, that is Steven Spielberg, and of course there is Tom Hanks and Dick's wife, Ethel. Well, Winters was called to the stage to accept the Emmy, and he did so with the grace and the aplomb that that he always had. Winters had charisma. There is no question in my mind about that. Well, after Band of Brothers and the Emmys, everybody wanted a piece of Dick Winters. I attended a pre-reunion party at the White House given by my Yale classmate, George Bush. And of course, he talked to me about Dick Winters, and he wanted to meet him. And so that happened. We met Bush in Harrisburg, and Dick accompanied him to the Township Supervisors Convention in Pennsylvania. And later, Winters was asked by Bush to introduce him to a campaign rally at the Hershey Stadium, which was attended by 33,000 people. Well, you know, from that point on, everybody wanted to meet Dick Winters. There were governors and the secretaries of Homeland Security and congressmen, members of the press, and there were famous architects.
Younger
famous architects. And of course, there was the statue in Normandy. Winters was still living when the statue in Normandy was proposed, and the only way that he agreed to support that was if the statue would be dedicated to all the junior officers that served in D-Day, and so it was. Of course, then following that, the same statue was replicated in Ephrata. Winters' library in his home, where I had the wonderful experience of spending so many hours, was replicated and moved to the Hershey Dairy Township Museum. And currently, there is a Dick Winters exhibit at the Gettysburg Museum of History. And it's very well done, and it's going to be there. It opened D-Day this past summer, and it will be there at least through D-Day of the coming year. Well, Winters was a recipient of countless honors and recognitions. And I have to tell you, as I shared in my eulogy, Dick's memorial service was attended by over 2,000 people at the Hershey Theater. Dick Hawksworth joined me as one of the eulogists. But as I said that day, Dick Winters, at the end of this incredible journey, was the same humble man that he was when it began. He was totally selfless. After the memorial service, Ethel Winters had arranged for a room in the restaurant at Devon's. And when I walked in the door, Hanks approached me and he said, "Hey, Doc," and you know, to understand why he called me Doc, you have to read the book. That's another long story and a funny one. But he said, "Hey, Doc," he said, "you know, Winters was really a complicated guy." And I said, "Well, why do you tell me that? Why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, because do you know that he almost bailed on me on the series?" And I said, "Well, actually, I do know that because I mailed a letter to you that gave you that news." Well, what he was talking about was that on a Sunday afternoon, I received a telephone call from Dick, and he asked me to come to see him. And he handed me a letter. The day before, he had received the first 2 episodes of Band of Brothers, the raw cuts, no music, what have you. But they wanted him to see the first 2 to just really get a sense of what he thought about the series. Well, Dick was outraged by the language and by the disrespect that it connoted in terms of the relationship, you know, between the enlisted men and he as the company commander. And so the letter said, you know, if this is the way it's going to be, you know, I'm done. I'm not going to be part of this. Now, here's a man who's on the cusp of becoming one of the most famous veterans of World War II in a film done by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. And he didn't care about that. You know, personal notoriety, his life was never about personal celebration. It never had anything to do with that. He was very upset because the story that was his passion was not going to be told in a manner that he thought was appropriate. And he said, "What do you think?" And I took a gulp and said, "Well, if I mail this tonight, Sunday, you'll probably get a call from Hanks on Thursday." Well, Thursday, the call came. And Hanks defended it. He said, "You know, there are people in this series at places they never were, saying things they never said. But that is the artistic license that I need to tell this story." And Dick's response was, well, I can't imagine that there are better storytellers than Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. But, I don't care. I am not going to follow through if this is the way this is going to be told. And Monday, Hanks called him back and said, Winters, you win. We need you. I'm going to go back and we're going to remove all the things that you objected to, and we're going to look forward in the series. And we're going to remove all the things that we assume you will object to. And they did. And Hanks later told Dick it cost them several $1 million to make those changes. Well, when Hanks thought Dick was complicated, I think he misread the fact that Dick was just a man of strong principle, and that it was going to be his way or it just wasn't going to be at all. I can also tell you that I was having lunch with Dick one day, and he said, Hoffman, he said, I think you're nuts, but I see you're going to be chairing the United Way campaign again. And he said, I've never approved of making any money on Band of Brothers. And he said, but I'm gonna violate that. And I've been approached by a company called Valor Studios to autograph military prints. They want to do a print of me. And if you don't know it, military prints that are autographed by participants is a huge industry, and the prints are extraordinarily expensive. And he said, but you have to do the negotiations. So I negotiated with these guys, and I had designed an addition to Dick's home, which was accessible for him. He was having trouble with his mobility. And we set up an assembly line, and Dick signed 1,000 prints. Wow. And he signed over to me a check for the United Way for $50,000, which to this day is the largest single gift that the Lebanon County United Way has ever received from an individual. But that's the kind of man he was. It was absolutely never about him in terms of fame or in terms of fortune. I always told Dick Winters that as great as was his wartime leadership, that I strongly felt that his greatest contribution through Band of Brothers was the fact that it initiated a new dialogue and a new appreciation for the American veteran and the American serviceman. And anybody who was around during the Vietnam era certainly understands how different the feeling is toward our veterans as it was then. And I think that, and I've always thought that Dick Winters had a great deal to do with that change. I'd like to close with a quote from First Sergeant Floyd Talbot, who was a member of Easy Company. He said, Winters, you were my ideal, my motor in combat. I would follow you into hell. When I was with you, I knew that everything was absolutely under control. Well, unlike the old soldier of General MacArthur, Dick Winters has not faded away. His legacy continues to bring honor and respect to his beloved Easy Company and thereby to all those who have served and all those who continue to serve today. Thank you. God bless America.